Hello and welcome back to the 10,000 Startups Podcast. This is Roger Royce, your host, where every week we bring you original content on issues of interest to the startup community. This week, this is an issue of interest not just to the startup community, but probably everybody in the world. We're going to talk about the new tariffs that we've been hearing about. And we have with us today two lawyers who specialize in this area. Ed Lebow from Haynes and Boone, Washington, D.C. office, and Colin Cox, who's from Haynes and Boone, Dallas. They both work in international trade. So thanks, guys, and I am your host, Roger Royce. I'm a partner in the Emerging Growth and Venture Capital Group at Haynes and Boone's in Palo Alto, California. Thanks, guys, for being here. And we all have a little bit of background from reading the news, as we know there's stuff going on in tariffs. But before we kind of jump into what the new tariffs are and where we are as of this moment, which seems to be changing a lot, but this moment is Thursday. What is it, March 13th? I think there's some confusion on just exactly how tariffs work and what they're intended to do. And, maybe you could help clear that up. Can we just do maybe a short primer on what a tariff is and how it's supposed to work and who collects it and who pays it?
Sure. It'd be nice if the president were watching. Perhaps he would understand that tariffs are taxes that are paid by the citizens of the importing country. In this case, we're talking about the United States. In fact, historically, before the passing of the original income tax in the early part of the 20th century, tariffs were the principal source of revenue for the U.S. government. As goods came into the United States, they would be taxed at a certain percentage of the value, declared value of the goods. Over time, of course, other forms of taxation have risen to the fore, and tariffs have backed off as a major source of revenue for the government, although significant revenues are still raised. Basically, what happens is that an importer declares what customs classification the goods are. What is this? Is this a toaster? Is this a microwave oven? Is this a potted, a piece of ceramic for pots? What is it? It is classified. And then there are tariff rates that are applied to particular classifications. In recent years, since the Second World War, there's a most favored nation provision where almost everybody gets the same rate applied to the same. There are certain countries that are outside that. They either, because they don't have qualifying systems of their own, they're taxed at special higher rates, or more prominently, there are several countries that have lower rates because they've entered into trade agreements with the United States. For example, most famously, the United States had the North American Free Trade Agreement among US, Canada, and Mexico during the first Trump administration. That was modified and renamed the US-Canada-Mexico Agreement, which allows, in certain circumstances, for goods to enter without duty from one country to the other, provided they are of sufficient local value or production of one of the countries and not merely using, for example, Mexico as a transit point for goods from China. But in any event, that's generally what the tariff system works. When the goods are brought in, the importer declares what the goods are, files an entry, certain paperwork with the Customs Service. The importer also has a bond in place guaranteeing that it's going to pay the duties. And sometime during the first year, the Customs Service kind of goes to the entry, cleans it up, sends a bill, and collects the money from the importer and has the bond to protect itself. That's a normal customs procedure. But go ahead, Roger.
So let me just stop you there. So let's use a real example. Let's suppose I'm going to buy a car that's made in a foreign country. Somebody in the US, some wholesaler or retailer maybe, is going to buy that car from the foreign manufacturer. There's an import duty imposed on, a tariff imposed on them that they are going to have to file and claim and self-report and eventually pay. And then, so their cost goes up. And then they'll turn around and sell that car to me. And presumably the impact of that is that when they make a decision as to whose car to buy, because they're going to have to charge me, the consumer, a bigger number, or someone's going to have to take less profit on the other end. And presumably because of that, they would be incentivized to maybe buy a car from a domestic manufacturer instead of a foreign manufacturer because it'll be a little cheaper. Is that the idea?
That is exactly correct. And in fact, in saying that, you point out one of the major inconsistencies in the current tariff proposals. Because on the one hand, we have the administration saying, oh, we're going to collect a lot of money from these tariffs. But if the effect of the tariffs is to cause people not to buy the imported product, but to buy the domestic product, they won't collect any tariffs because people will be buying domestic. So it doesn't work that way. And second, of course, the party in any case who's paying the tariff is directly or indirectly going to be the U.S. consumer of the goods.
Okay, gotcha. All right, I interrupted you. Did you want to finish with how it works, or did we
No,
cover?
I think that's pretty much how it works. What we have now, as of yesterday, however, is an additional tariff across the board of 25% on steel products, 10% on aluminum products from anywhere in the world. And that's in addition to the tariff that's already in place.
Okay, so let's talk about the new tariffs. That was interesting, from anywhere in the world. I thought these tariffs were country specific, Canada and Mexico and China. It sounds like it's broader than that.
On these particular tariffs, the steel tariffs, they're and aluminum tariffs, they're applied across the world for products across the world. This is pursuant to a provision called Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. It's basically a provision that allows the U.S. government to do an investigation to see if particular kinds of imports are providing a risk or causing a damage to national security. And the finding is that these metal products are damaging U.S. national security. They're undermining our ability to maintain metal industries, which are important to defense. And therefore, we have to put a tariff on these imported goods to stimulate domestic production.
Okay, gotcha. So what are the tariffs we've been reading about in the papers on, the new tariffs, the big ones?
Well, if 25% isn't big enough for you, we also have tariffs being imposed initially, but then suspended on Canada and Mexico. Colin, maybe you'd like to sort of run down what happened with those for Roger.
Yeah, so the Canada and Mexico tariffs are definitely ones that I think are getting a lot of publicity right now. So when they were originally announced, there was going to be a 25% tariff on goods coming in from Mexico and Canada, but effective as of March 7th, the administration announced that actually products that qualified under the USMCA would not be subject to those additional 25% tariffs. In the interim, there were some additional announcements postponing the original date, the effective date of the tariffs, but that's what has generated a lot of news right now, and I think a lot of interest from companies that have supply chains, significant supply chains or operations in the region, what the current status is for products from those two countries.
So let's pause on that for a second. So USMCA. So this is this agreement that replaced NAFTA, right? And covers goods from Canada and Mexico. And I think you said that any goods that are subject to USMCA are exempt from the tariffs. Is that right?
Anything that is qualifying, and as of now, because as we've all seen over the past couple of weeks, this could change. But currently, anything that qualifies under the USMCA would not be subject to the new 25% additional tariffs.
Okay. I don't know how big that category is, but apparently not big enough, or there won't be so much controversy.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think there have been some reports that have cited some senior administration officials that say that currently only about 50% of imports from Mexico and 38% of imports from Canada qualify under USMCA. So not everyone has tried to get qualification or sought qualification on the USMCA for a variety of different reasons. One may have been that previously the tariffs were just so small that it didn't justify the compliance costs. Obviously, that calculus is probably going to change going forward. And so there's room to grow, I think, for companies who have their supply chains in those two countries, grow compliance, grow how they view their custom strategies.
Yes.
I want to throw in a couple more points. One is that I misspoke when I said it was going to be 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum. That was the first Trump administration Section 232 tariffs. This time it's 25% on both steel and aluminum. It's also worth noting that in addition to the Canada and Mexico tariffs, which have been partly suspended, as Colin explained, there are now 10% and then 10% again, for a total of 20% of new tariffs across the board on all products from China. And this is in addition to the metal tariffs, in addition to any anti-dumping duties, in addition to any other tariffs, so that the duties or tariffs, either word is they're interchangeable, on imports from China is increasing rapidly.
Yeah. So, you know, in this international economy that we live in with almost every company, even in startup land, almost every company is a multinational fairly quickly. It must be really difficult to determine whether a product is from a country or whether it originates there. Can you talk a little bit about what that means? How do we determine? Because, you know, I know that a car, even going back to cars, because I'm simple that way. I know a car that's manufactured in the U.S. is going to be using parts from all over the world, right? So are there rules on origination?
Many rules on origination. And a car, by the way, is not simple. A car may be the most complicated thing there is, because parts go back and forth across the border. A piece of wire is made, it goes into a harness. The harness is made, it goes back, it goes into a computer system. The computer system comes in, goes back into the car. Goods pass back and forth across the border multiple times to make cars. But the simplest way to talk about where a product is made is to look at the last place where there was substantial transformation, where it was changed from whatever parts it was comprised of into a new and different article of commerce. And you can be sure that there's a history of customs service rulings on origin and where a product is from, how much value added does there have to be, is it mere assembly or is it an actual transformation? Many complex decisions and rules over the years on this product, on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, you know, to me, it sounds a little bit like a sales tax in a way, because it is, except it's at a different level of the market. It's not at the consumer level. It's at the first time it comes into the country. And I guess the other thing is that it's just the importer that bears the responsibility. Let me ask, what has been the other country's response to the new tariffs?
They have been responding aggressively. For example, Europe has imposed just today or in the last day or two since the U.S. steel tariffs went in place, tariffs on similar U.S. items coming in. And also they have picked out U.S. products that come from primarily from red states, from Republican states, and have imposed very high duties in their countries on the imports from America. For example, if you went to buy bourbon as a wholesaler from an importer, next week it would be a lot more expensive than it was last week. The idea being to put pressure on political folks in Republican states to go back to the Trump administration and say, cut this out. The Trump administration, of course, is saying, well, if you do this to us, we're going to do this to you. And you get a ratcheting up of reciprocal tariffs, which is what is called a trade war, which hurts everyone, helps no one. And that is what we are facing right now, sort of America against the rest of the world. This idea that we can sort of take the size of our market and use it to bully the rest of the world into acceding to our demands is not going to be as easy as some may think.
Okay, do you have any predictions as to how this is going to end up? And let me just, and without taking any sides here, I had heard that US products tend to get tariffed at a higher rate in other countries than foreign products coming into US. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I had heard. And I'm wondering if what you would expect to happen in a rational world, I guess, is at the end of the day, we would have an even rate, of tariff on products going back and forth. Is that likely to happen here?
Well, you've just put your finger on the next big development, Roger, which is called reciprocal tariffs. On April 2nd, the United States has promised to invoke a program of imposing exactly what you said, tariffs to reciprocate the rates being charged by other countries. Now, as you can imagine, given the tens of thousands of products and the hundreds of countries involved in the world, doing this is a massive job for the Customs Service, figuring out even what to ask for, let alone having people know what to declare and how to collect, so that it may be limited somewhat, at least in its rollout, industry by industry. But it is certainly something which the administration has threatened. It's not necessarily completely a question of fairness to keep tariffs exactly the same country to country, because it has a lot to do with level of development, with buying power, with size of the industry, with how the products are used in that country, by trade-offs that are made among products between and among countries. So it can be complicated, but the basic idea of reciprocal tariffs has now been proposed, and that is one of the areas where we may in fact see some permanence, so changes made and some more permanent changes kept. I think that these major across-the-board tariffs against our trading partners will eventually be settled out, because it helps no one. And as long as the parties can declare a victory and move on to something else, especially given the pressure from US business, I think that that's likely to happen. The reciprocal tariff issue, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. It's going to be very difficult to do. Maybe morally, it's a little bit more defensible.
Yeah. Okay, well, and then the final thing, and this is kind of getting to the punchline, is what should companies be doing right now? How should they be reacting? How can they protect themselves? How can they position themselves?
Well, they can buy American. They can pressure their representatives to ask the United States to back off from its tariff policies, and many people in US business are doing that, some more privately, some more publicly. The stock market is certainly giving a signal to the administration of what the business community thinks about the tariffs. Also, on a more company-specific basis, those that are importing from Canada and Mexico want to be sure that they qualify for the US MCA. Colin, why don't you just run down what some of the things they can do to make that happen?
Yeah, well, it would involve complying with some of the rules of origin, and there's a couple different buckets that the agreement sets out, and one obviously is trying to evaluate your supply chain and see if there's a way to ensure that products that are wholly obtained or produced, which is one of the buckets under the rules of origin under the USMCA, ensure that you maximize products that are wholly obtained or produced in Mexico or Canada. And that's a simple way to qualify under the agreement for duty-free treatment as of right now. Also, when we're talking about qualifying your products under the USMCA, there are record-keeping rules that you're going to want to comply with and make sure you're keeping records for your imports for about 5 years minimum. And then I think generally speaking, companies should be looking at strategies for their supply chains just generally now, and seeing what can be done to take advantage of the at least on the USMCA point, what products can be sourced and qualified as USMCA compliant.
Okay. Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the advice. I don't have any other questions. I want to thank you, Ed and Colin, for explaining and demystifying this whole thing for me at least, and I think for our audience as well. This is Roger Royce with the 10,000 Startups Podcast. We've been talking about tariffs today with Ed Lebow and Colin Cox from Haynes Boone. And with that, we're going to conclude the podcast. Thanks very much, and we'll see you all next week.